Terribly sorry for the month-long wait of me just telling you to spam full release slash over and over again, but it wouldn't quite be Monster Hunter quality if I just said that, now would it? Chapters are available, feel free to jump around, and let's get into my full release slash guide. The full potential of the Switch Axe is realized by its mechanics, as they define the weapon's identity and playstyle. In Wilds, the interaction between these mechanics shapes how players are intended to perform, which can come off quite streamlined. Those mechanics are Morphing, Switch Gauge, Phial types, and Amp State. Morphing is when the weapon swaps between its two modes, Axe and Sword. This can be done in various ways, like drawing the weapon or pre- and post-attack. Morphing can extend combos, offer mobility, and, when morphing from Sword to Axe mode, generates a small, fixed amount of Switch Gauge. In Wilds, morphing is primarily used to enter and exit states for utility rather than for damage. The Switch Gauge is the premier feature of the weapon. The gauge is shown beneath the health and stamina bar and is consumed when using attacks in Sword mode. The maximum value is 100, and each attack has a different amount of gauge that is consumed when attacking, but I'll be labeling the value as a percentage rather than a whole. This indicator on the Switch Gauge represents the 30% mark. When the Switch Gauge drops below the indicator, Sword mode attacks remain usable while in Sword mode, but the gauge will turn purple. In Axe mode, attempting to morph back into Sword mode triggers a reload, recovering 30% of the gauge, but briefly leaving you exposed. There are other ways to replenish the Switch Gauge, such as successfully landing axe attacks, manually reloading, landing any offset, morphing from Sword to Axe mode, and reaching Amp State, among other things. Power Axe increases Axe mode attacks by 10 additional raw and boosts the Switch Gauge fill rate of successful Axe attacks, and I must emphasize that it only affects Axe attacks. Other than the small damage boost, it is nice to have increased fill rate even if you don't use the plus 10 raw buff. It lasts for 45 seconds and can be refreshed by using any heavy slam variation. The Phial type of your weapon provides a bonus attribute when using Sword mode attacks. There are 6 different Phial types: Power, Element, Poison, Paralysis, Exhaust, and Dragon. Power Phial increases the raw damage of your Sword mode attacks by 17% of the weapon's base raw. Element Phial increases the element and status value of your weapon by 45% of the weapon's base element. Poison and Paralysis Phial add their respective element to Sword mode attacks that follow the same 33% proc rate as status element weapons. Exhaust Phial deals exhaust buildup with every attack, which can flinch monsters more often, drain their stamina, and can potentially stun the monster with enough exhaust hits to the head. The last Phial type is Dragon Phial, which adds Dragon element to Sword mode attacks. To elaborate, only Sword mode attacks and Phial bursts have Dragon element. The last mechanic is Amp State. Successfully landing Sword mode attacks builds a red meter beneath the Switch Gauge. Once filled, 30% of the Switch Gauge is replenished, the weapon enters its Amp State, which adds Phial bursts to Sword mode attacks, and unlocks the ability to use certain sword attacks for 45 seconds. If you do not land an attack every few seconds while generating the gauge, you will lose 3 points of amped buildup. Successfully landing an attack will refresh this drain timer. Sword mode attacks vary on how much amp state meter is generated on hit, and each Phial type has a set value threshold to reach amp state. These value thresholds are similar to the values that are seen in Rise. From fastest to slowest growth, Poison and Dragon Phial require 50 points to reach amp state, Element and Exhaust at 70, Paralysis with 100, and Power Phial with the most requiring 150 points. Something funny to note, unlike World and Rise, if you reach the value threshold to enter amp state perfectly, it won't actually make you enter amp state until you push past the value. The next section covers the 2 modes, their attacks, and detailed information concerning them, so if you don't want to experience that, then skip to the timestamp on screen now. Also, due to the game being on multiple platforms, I'll be using the universal control scheme of Attack 1, Attack 2, and Attack 3, rather than button prompts like triangle or mouse button 1. Axe mode is still considered the long-reach version of the weapon by the devs, but it takes on a new role in Wilds as the sword mode's battery charger. Due to this, it has once again been cannibalized by the sword mode, except now it exclusively services its counterpart. Despite this, it still has its uses. While in Axe mode, the switch gauge no longer passively regenerates, and instead will gain switch gauge from successfully landing axe attacks. In order for the weapon to passively regen, it must be sheathed, where it will gain 3% gauge every few seconds. The weapon has decent base movement speed. Its stationary, or non-combat evades, are rolls that can be chained consecutively so long as the stamina is willing. Post-attack evades have 3 forms: forward roll, sidestepping left or right, or what's called hops, and backwards rolling. While in focus mode, it copies the post-attack evades. Unlike previous titles, Axe post-attack sidesteps can now be chained into another evade immediately. Sword mode remains the faster, combo-oriented form of the weapon, but this time it gets an additional finishing attack in its kit that has become the focus of its game plan. In this title, sword attacks use its Phial types and fast attacks to deal the bulk of its damage, but it has also gotten a significant boost to a few motion values. This remains the most important form of the weapon, and with Axe's new role, uptime for it is dramatically increased. Another benefit of sword mode is that its attacks will have built-in Mind's Eye, or deflection prevention. While in sword mode, your gauge will not passively regenerate, and using attacks consumes the gauge. The weapon has incredibly slow base movement speed, much like that of the greatsword. Stationary, or non-combat evades are hefty rolls that cannot be chained together as easily. Post-attack evades are small hops in any of the cardinal directions that can be chained with a follow-up evade in any direction. While aiming in focus mode, all initial evades become hops that can be chained into another evade. Now I'll cover the attacks, starting with the face buttons before discussing combo attacks. Previous iterations of the Axe mode draw attack were just side slash, but in Wilds, it's now a faster overhead slash with the exact same motion values, gauge generation, and combo routes. Axe mode draw attack isn't your go-to draw attack unless you're out of switch gauge. The alternative draw attack is the Morph slash. It mimics the motion values and combo paths as sword overhead slash. This can be done stationary, or, when holding forward, can move the player forward a short distance. This attack has a focus alteration. Pressing attack 1 while stationary will activate overhead slash. It has moderate damage, but loses a gimmick of its former versions where its hitbox would start from behind the weapon, but now has a prolonged hitbox centered on the hunter's body after swinging. A fast lunging thrust that jabs with the toe of the axe. While it can be used for minor mobility purposes or quick pokes to recover faster from, its new purpose lies in its combo path. Pressing attack 1 after forward slash will now chain into side slash, which guarantees spiral burst slash after. Forward slash is one of the moves that has focus mode alterations. Normally the distance traveled is pitiful, but when the orange reticle is present, the lunge will travel farther. Consecutive swings from left to right that consume stamina to perform. This attack has seen quite a few intentional or unintentional nerfs to its performance, such as no longer increasing damage from consecutive swings like in Iceborne and Rise, as well as no longer allowing the right swing into the heavy slam shortcut as seen in Sunbreak. This attack can lead into Morph sweep after 1 wild swing and heavy slam after 2 swings. Pressing attack 3 during wild swing will perform a 3-hit combo that automatically morphs at the end of the attack. While it is known as Morph Sweep, it is not affected by Rapid Morph until the axe to sword morph attack occurs. Its motion values are back to World version, where the second hit is the strongest of the 3. This attack consumes sharpness weirdly though, adding up to 1 sharpness point per 3 hits. Pressing attack 1 after 2 wild swings will perform the 2-hit attack that is Heavy Slam. It isn't fast or strong enough to justify using it at all times, but its secondary effect is activating Power Axe mode. Fortunately, there are other, more effective ways to activate Power Axe, so this attack you'll more than likely never see. Holding forward and pressing attack 2 will activate forward overhead slash. This attack covers a considerable distance and can be performed in any direction outside of focus mode. After certain attacks, forward overhead slash can be used to go in any direction but directly backward, as that would activate fade slash. However, after using fade slash, you can then use forward overhead slash backwards. This attack is great for pursuing a monster or pseudo-evading without consuming stamina. The distance covered can actually catch up to monsters that have fallen out of a special wound topple animation. While not as impactful, this attack also has a focus mode alteration. Another interesting feature is that if you use forward overhead slash in any direction but forward, and then activate focus mode during the duration, you'll then snap to the direction that's necessary for the hit to land. Fade slash is a post-attack move that slides the player back a set distance. This is primarily a positioning move, but can also be used to pseudo-evade. That means if you're too close to a monster and don't want to evade, you can fade slash, or if you predict a certain attack, you can get a set distance away from it. In focus mode, this attack can be used without needing to use a different move first. The Wild's exclusive attack that replaces Rising Slash from previous games. If Rising Slash comes into contact with a monster's attack during the active frames of the move, it will cause an offset to occur, or build up the next one, replenishing 30% of the switch gauge and allowing for one of 3 follow-ups. When offsetting attacks, there are 2 versions of the effect, a successful offset and an offset buildup. The first offset against an attack will guarantee a successful offset that will pseudo-topple the monster and allow for a follow-up. Once the initial successful offset has taken place, any following offset will build up to the next topple. A successful offset can be followed up by 2 different attacks: the follow-up Heavy Slam and the follow-up Morph Slash. Follow-up Heavy Slam has motion values of 20 and 75, generates a combined total of 50, and activates Power Axe mode. Follow-up Morph Slash has 2 hits, a slash with a motion value of 120, and a Phial explosion with a motion value of 65 that generates 30 amped gauge. These moves have their use cases, as Axe is for switch gauge generation and Sword is for damage output. A combo-only follow-up attack that deals low damage. Despite this, it has a major role in the game, as it is one of 3 attacks that leads directly into the much desired Spiral Burst Slash. Many of the Axe attacks will combo into Side Slash, and figuring out which one links into it faster is what matters most. A 2-hit attack that generates a hefty amount of switch gauge upon successfully striking a target. While Spiral Burst Slash doesn't necessarily deal an alluring amount of damage, its utility is the primary reason it is sought after. It generates a combined total of 35% switch gauge, which will allow for sword mode to be immediately accessible if below 30%. This attack also has a focus alteration. A downward attack when in the air. Its primary function is to deal damage for the mounting threshold, which, next to the dismount attack, has the highest amount of mount application. When sliding, pressing attack 1 will perform Jumping Sweep, which deals the same damage as Overhead Slash and Jumping Slash. It has less mount building than Jumping Slash, so it's not really an attack you should be pining for. The follow-up to wall scaling, Jumping Sweep is probably not going to be in your normal rotation, as it takes quite a bit of time to not only start up, but also how little you'll actually be using it. A benefit that both Jumping Slash, Sweep, and Scaling Wide Sweep have is that they can combo into Side Slash. The standard morph that swaps between states. By remaining stationary and not pressing in any direction, you swap from axe to sword, or sword to axe. If the switch gauge is below 30% while in axe mode and you attempt to morph, you will be forced to reload. Reload will keep you in a long animation that restores 30% of your switch gauge. This is a latch-stitch effort and should be actively avoided, but it does have some interesting mechanics associated with it. It no longer instantly fills the gauge as soon as you tap the button, and only fills once you press the new Phial in. However, before pressing the Phial in, you can now evade cancel out of the animation. Lastly, if you reload in the air, the reload as well as the recovery time are much faster. After certain axe attacks, pressing attack 3 will initiate a Morph Slash. Most axe Morph Slashes transition into a sword overhead slash variation with the same motion value, amp generation, gauge cost, and combo paths. If you use Morph Slash after certain attacks, holding forward will allow players to move forward before attacking. This also has a focus alteration. 2-hit Rising Slash that only happens after any Heavy Slam variation, and Spiral Burst Slash. Despite its frequent appearance, it actually has less amp generation with a combined total of 10. In other circumstances, the motion value would be the breadwinner of an attack if its amp generation is pitiful, but this attack has low motion values for both hits. This is the Morph option available after 2 very important and highly used attacks, so its utility is merely as a bridge to get back to sword, rather than something that deals damage or generates amp. Sword Mode's version of Overhead Slash. While the draw version's lunge go quite far, the overhead lunge is actually pretty minuscule. In Focus Mode, this attack can be used in any cardinal direction, both as the initial strike and the post-attack or combo version. A 2-hit Horizontal Slash attack. Each hit has different damage values and amped gauge generation. Due to its decreased damage, it serves more as a utility attack to fill amped gauge. A 3-hit attack variation of Double Slash, and can only be performed after Left Rising Slash and Morph Rising Double Slash. A multi-hit attack where the blade is thrust forward and revved until the finishing with an explosion. This attack deals a combined total of 10 hits, 1 with the thrust, 8 rev hits, and 1 explosion. The explosion itself has received a large motion value bonus with a whopping 135, and is considered a hit that is affected by sharpness and affinity values. There are multiple ways to cancel out of this attack. The initial thrust can be left at just that. The revving sequence can be halted. And the explosion can be done early by holding back from the position your hunter is facing, and will drop the motion value to 65. After canceling Elemental Discharge, you're able to evade attack 1 into Right Rising Slash, and attack 2 into Double Slash. During amp state, Elemental Discharge can be held down either by holding attack 1, attack 2, or both to perform zero-sum discharge. The startup frames for this attack are quite slow, but once grappled onto the monster, hunters gain knockback resistance for the duration and deal 12 ticks before the final explosion. Carrying the explosion to completion has a whopping 160 motion value, but ending the explosion early is 75. Despite how powerful this attack is, it is horrific to use for one reason: its recovery time. When you do an early discharge, you are unable to cancel into another action for a few seconds, and if you go to completion, you're unable to evade cancel for a hell of a lot more. I know this is a Wilds guide, but I really need you to see why this attack isn't worth it. The recovery time for World and Rise early discharge can cancel into another action almost instantly. For the complete discharge, World takes longer than Rise, but you're not stuck and unable to do anything anywhere near as long as you are in Wilds. After a delay, your hunter performs a Rising Slash with the sword. If you are struck during the startup of the attack, you will resist the attack and perform 2 follow-up slashes that raise a substantial amount of amp gauge and refund the cost of the attack. Depending on when you activate Counter Rising Slash, the damage received can be reduced. If you activate the attack the instant that you are hit, you will massively reduce the damage taken. Anywhere behind that, to before the Rising Slash is performed will reduce damage, but not to the same degree. Beware what you counter when you're using this attack, as you are still receiving the hit despite countering. If an attack will inflict a blight or an ailment, you will be affected by it, such as sleep, paralysis, webbed, and more. You will resist an ailment only if you have the appropriate resistance skills equipped. Something else to keep track of, you cannot be stunned if you successfully parry multiple attacks in a row. However, you are still receiving stun values from the attacks you parry and will reach the threshold for stun without tipping over. If you receive a direct attack from any source even after parrying 10 attacks in a row, you will be stunned immediately. This attack has a focus alteration. Pressing attack 1, 2, and 3 together unleashes a single hit charge slash that swings horizontally. During amp state, if this attack comes into contact with the target, it will spread 3 additional Phial explosions. While it has a high motion value in amp gauge generation, it isn't the premier attack that you should be using even during amp state. Upon achieving amp state, however, full release slash becomes accessible. Full release slash has the same command input as unbridled, except you are required to hold down attack 3. After a brief charging period, the attack will become full release slash and deal 2 slashes that leave behind 3 Phial explosions on the first strike and 5 additional explosions on the second hit, each with varying motion values. During the active frames of full release slash, you have knockback resistance. This doesn't mean during the charging session, this means during the strike itself. This is the premier attack on the Switch Axe, as it is the highest damaging attack with the best form of utility in its knockback resistance and follow-up options. I'm classifying these attacks in the same category, but they have different motion values. Sword Rising Slashes are split into 2 actions, left Rising Slash and right Rising Slash, and can only be comboed into after an overhead slash, Heavenward Flurry, and canceled Elemental Discharge. Their motion values have been increased in this game, lending itself to being viable for damage as opposed to its previous iterations. During use, they can also be used to move in any of the cardinal directions, just as overhead slashes. A 2-hit attack that generates the highest amount of amp gauge with a total of 45 when both attacks connect. This attack can only be used after a double or triple slash and a successful counter rising slash. While it is the leading amp gauge generator, it doesn't do good damage outside of that, so once amp state is achieved, it's more likely that Heavenward Flurry won't be used, as its switch gauge consumption, startup frames, and recovery options make other attacks more appealing. This attack also has a focus alteration. Sword mode attacks during amp state have small explosions that deal low damage but maintain sword mode DPS. Even if a monster moves out of the range of the attack, they will still be affected by the burst, as it has sticky properties like Charge Blade Phials. These bursts have lower modifiers, so their elemental damage and status application are lesser in effect than standard hits. The aerial overhead slash that has a lower motion value than its standing counterpart. Despite the lower damage, it has good mount values, just 5 lower than the highest values of 55 from axe attacks. Only accessible during slides, this shares the same animation as Jumping Slash, but has 10 less mount value at 40. The benefit of this attack is that it can be followed up by other aerial attacks such as Sword Jumping Slash, Morph Slash, and Elemental Discharge. The aerial Elemental Discharge variation that starts with the initial thrust and only starts the revving sequence once you hit the ground. A funny effect this attack has is that it will halt all aerial momentum to perform this attack even after a sliding motion. Another fact about this attack is that if Elemental Discharge is performed while jumping, it will automatically become zero-sum discharge during amp state. The sword version of the wall climbing attack. It performs 2 strikes that deal 2 different mount values in amp gauge generation. Not exactly sure when you'll ever use this attack unless you were trying to go for a stylish mount, but I won't judge. Sword morph attacks have the unique property of replenishing switch gauge upon use. However, the value restored is static amongst all the morphs and is combined with successfully landing axe attacks. The sword morph attack that mimics axe side slash. This is the most common morph available, as well as a desirable attack to perform, not for its damage, but for its combo path, as Spiral Burst Slash can be used immediately after. The property of this attack changes when morphing while mobile, such as holding a directional input or morphing after evading. Not only does it provide mobility, but it also increases the motion value of the attack by 22. This also has a focus alteration. A new morph input that morphs into the forward overhead slash by pressing attack 3 plus attack 2 either after an attack or while holding a directional input outside of combat. The fastest morph option available, holding back and pressing attack 3 performs a low horizontal swing while moving backwards. This is an excellent positioning tool and serves as a secondary function as a fast cancel attack. It also has the benefit of having Spiral Burst Slash as a follow-up. Certain follow-up attacks are faster when performed after Downward Fade Slash. Axe Fade Slash, Offset Rising Slash, Focus Assault, and Wild Swing do not have a delay when chaining them together. When using Morph Slash, the hunter spins around before swiping, but if you hold forward while performing Morph Slash, the animation is much faster. Pressing attack 3 after performing either Rising Slash or a failed and successful counter Rising Slash will perform Morph Double Slash. This attack has seen better days, as it has lost 10 motion value on the second hit and generates a combined 5 switch gauge, 2 on the first hit and 3 on the second. Due to the lack of emphasis and strength of morphing in this game, Morph Double Slash is no longer a desirable attack. It could work in some very fringe cases, but we'll get into that later. I won't cover morph jumping slashes here, as they share the same values as their jumping counterparts. Now that all the basic attacks are out of the way, we can get into the game's specific attacks such as sneak attack, mounting, focus strikes, and offsets. At the start of every hunt, when a monster loses sight of you, or if the monster leaves to another area and has been out of vision for long enough, will allow a sneak attack prompt. Switch Axe Sneak Attack is a heavy slam variation that has motion values of 50 and 56, activates Power Axe mode, and generates a total of 40 switch gauge. When mounted onto the monster, you have the ability to use your knife attacks or your weapon. The weapon attack has a motion value of 35, consumes 0.1 sharpness, and generates 5 switch gauge. If the weapon attack comes into contact with a wound, the mounting finisher is automatically performed, which is a zero-sum discharge while mounted on the monster. The initial hit is 60, with the ticks being 12, and the final explosion is 80. Switch Axe has 2 different focus strike variations for axe and sword that can be interchanged, and both have a unique finisher. When initially landing a focus strike, it will hit the target twice. For axe mode, the initial hits have a motion value of 15 and will perform 4 rising slashes with a motion value of 20 each that generates 5 switch gauge per hit for a total of 30 switch gauge recovered. The finishing strike is a heavy slam finisher that generates a combined total of 35, with the second hit generating 30. For sword mode, it will deal 2 hits of 25 for the initial strike, and follows up with 3 strikes that have a motion value of 35 each, followed by Phial bursts whether you're in amped state or not. Each hit generates 7 amped gauge per hit. The finishing strike is an elemental discharge variation where the thrust has a motion value of 20 and the explosion with 80, generating 7 amped gauge for the thrust and 10 for the explosion, totaling at 45 gauge generated. These attacks can be morphed between with instances that carry their own uses, but something to note is that if you start in axe mode, you will have 4 additional attacks, but if you start in sword mode, you'll have 3 additional attacks, even if you morph to the other form. So if you hit focus assault on axe mode and then swap to sword, you'll have 3 additional attacks. If you swap from sword to axe, you'll only have 2. A 5-hit axe combo while mounted. The 5th hit deals more damage. A 2-hit axe attack that propels you off the sacred. The first hit does not have any mount values, but the second hit does, and rivals jumping slash for the highest mount buildup. With the attacks out of the way, we can discuss the combos the weapon can perform and their intended uses. The standard switch gauge filling combo of pressing attack 1 3 times for overhead slash, side slash, and spiral burst slash. This isn't necessarily your go-to, but it sets up the precedent of how important it is to reach side slash and spiral burst slash, and can help form your thoughts for future combos, or at least where you'll want to be. Other variations include the chasing versions, where you will use either forward slash, forward overhead slash, jumping slash, and then finally leading into side slash and spiral burst slash. One of the bread and butter combos for Switch Axe sword mode. Due to the increased motion values of the sword rising slashes, this 3-string combo is actually a viable option as a damage dealing combo. Simply pressing attack 1 3 times is all that's required. A variation of this combo is done by introducing double slash after the right rising slash, so it would appear as overhead slash, right rising slash, double slash, and repeat. The traditional fill rate combo of double or triple slash into Heavenward Flurry. This generates a total of 73 amped gauge if all attacks connect, and 80 amped gauge if triple slash is used. To repeat the combo, you can either press attack 1 to perform right rising slash, or evade cancel and start over again. Counter rising slash is a powerful amped generator when successfully parrying, as it has a combined total of 38 amped gauge generation. The follow-up to a successful counter rising slash is Heavenward Flurry, which awards an additional 45 amp generation. Upon successfully landing this combo, you can earn a combined total of 83 amp gauge. Heavenward Flurry isn't necessarily a high damage dealing attack, and it has a long startup and active frame duration, so its primary use is to generate amp gauge. This is especially useful when starting a hunt, as we will see later. When in sword mode, use Morph slash either stationary or holding forward, and use spiral burst slash. This can be done both in a combo or out of a combo. This combo has 3 different variations in Morph overhead slash, Morph double slash, and downward fade slash. By using overhead slash into either left or right rising slash, you can follow up with Morph double slash into spiral burst. With downward fade, you can immediately chain into spiral burst either during a combo or out of combat. Similar to the previous combo, but the starting attack is counter rising slash. After using counter rising slash, you can follow up with a Morph double slash or downward fade slash into spiral burst. Full release slash is the premier attack of the Switch Axe in Wilds, and as such, you're going to want to use it as much as you can. Luckily, full release can be followed up by spiral burst slash. This combo is fairly simple. Full release slash, spiral burst slash, Morph rising double slash, then full release again. Full release consumes 40 switch gauge in order to use it. If you have at least 70 or more switch gauge, you are able to perform a different variation of this combo. After completing a full release slash, you are reverted to axe mode, which is why you're able to use spiral burst immediately. This variation can extend the infinite, as it will be able to loop back into itself. Full release slash, axe morph slash, full release slash again, spiral burst slash, axe morph rising double slash, then full release again. Due to the commitment of the attack, you'll have to consider what the monster is doing next, how long it has been down for, or if you can perfectly time the knockback resistance of full release. The combo when first encountering a monster to generate as much amped gauge before the hunt actually starts. This is primarily for monsters that don't have a roar, or if you manage to flinch a monster that does have one. Distance will determine what variation you perform. Variation 1 is if the monster flinches too far. Sneak attack, forward overhead slash, axe morph slash, double slash, Heavenward Flurry. If the monster hasn't fully finished its opening gesture, you can cancel into right rising slash combo or amped gauge fill rate combo number 1. Variation 2 replaces forward overhead slash with an evade, so sneak attack, side evade, axe morph slash, double slash, Heavenward Flurry. The reason for the side evade is because it recovers faster than forward evade, and if you use axe morph slash after a forward evade, it automatically forces you to perform the moving version of the attack rather than allowing you the choice. This combo is for monsters that have roars that can interrupt you. It generates more amped gauge because counter rising slash is introduced. Monsters have different roar times and animations, so you'll have to be more flexible when considering this combo, as you'll have to plug in a few holes early. You can perform either variation 1 or 2 of opening combo number 1, axe morph slash, double slash, then counter Rising Slash against the monster's roar, and follow up with a Heavenward Flurry. What happens next depends on whether or not you manage to flinch the monster, which you would evade to chase the monster before using Double Slash again, or, if you enrage the monster, counter Rising Slash again and Heavenward follow-up. This combo requires Rapid Morph to perform effectively, as the base attack speed of Morph Double Slash is extremely slow and the motion value isn't enough to justify the attack. Morph Double Slash can now only be used after left or right Rising Slash, and counter Rising Slash, both unsuccessful and successful. However, you don't want to use it after left Rising Slash or an unsuccessful counter Rising Slash, as the startup frames of Morph Double Slash after left Rising Slash is increased with no focus magnetism, and unsuccessful counter Rising Slash has too many active frames. Instead, it should be Sword Overhead Slash or Axe Morph Slash into right Rising Slash, Morph Double Slash, Axe Morph Slash, repeat. When successful counter Rising Slash happens, you're able to Morph Double Slash after as well before Axe Morph Slash, and then chaining into either the first variation or the counter Rising Slash variation. One of the best things about Switch Axe is its ability to seamlessly switch between its combos. Your combo routes are entirely dependent on what the monster is doing and what your current needs are gauge-wise or damage-wise. There are unique aspects to the weapon that, though minuscule or unnoticeable, could have a large impact on performance. We'll start with focus alterations, which you may have heard me state earlier during the attack section, but if you skipped it, I'll elaborate. This is referred to by the community as focus magnetism, as certain attacks will gain a lunging property when in focus mode. These are all the focus magnetism points of the Switch Axe that I know of. Forward slash increases thrusting distance, forward overhead slash increases running distance, offset rising slash scoots the player slightly forward, spiral burst slash has the first attack scoot you, and the second attack lunges in order to make the second hit. Axe Morph Slash, when holding forward, increases the running distance. Heavenward Flurry will leap forward on the first strike to guarantee the second hit. Counter Rising Slash, when successful, will have it zoom across the field. Unbridled and Full Release Slash will have its initial strike lunge much further. Sword Morph Slash, when holding forward, will travel a much further distance. Sword Morph Double Slash will have the first and second hit scoot toward the target after a right Rising Slash or a counter Rising Slash. Switch gauge management is far more vital in this game due to how expensive attacks are to perform in sword mode. There are various ways to replenish your gauge, and while every axe attack can generate gauge, not every axe attack is as effective at doing so. There are 5 attacks that have the highest gauge generation, and those are, from least to greatest, Offset Rising Slash successfully, which generates 30%, Morph Combination Finisher, which generates 35, 5 on the first hit, 30 on the second, Spiral Burst Slash, which generates 35 as well, but has different values with 15 on the first hit and 20 on the second, Sneak Attack with a combined total of 40 with 5 on the first hit, 30 on the second, and lastly, Follow Up Heavy Slam with a combined total of 50, where 15 is on the first hit and 35 is on the second. While these are crucial parts of the move list, you're more than likely going to see consistent use from only 2 attacks, Axe Spiral Burst and Focus Assault, as the others are conditional or less likely to appear as consistently. Spiral Burst Slash is one of the most important attacks in this weapon's kit due to its high switch gauge generation, ease of access, combo routes, and attack speed. It's not an attack that can be used outside of a combo, and like with other weapons, you're often looking for shortcuts in order to reach it. Luckily enough, there are plenty of combo paths for Spiral Burst Slash. Any side slash attack can be immediately followed up by Spiral Burst Slash, which means both the Axe Side Slash and Sword Morph Slash. This is the full list of attacks that can be chained into Spiral Burst Slash. Side Slash, Successful Offset Slash that does not trigger an offset, Dismount Attack, Sword Morph Slash, Downward Fade Slash, Morph Double Slash, and unbridled or full release slash. Amped gauge sits in a similar position as a switch gauge, where every sword attack can generate gauge, but only certain attacks are worth their salt. The highest generating sword attacks from least to greatest are unbridled slash with a total of 25, double slash with 28, 10 on the first hit and 18 on the second, elemental discharge, well, more rather the explosion, with a total of 30 before all the other hits, triple slash with a combined total of 35, where 7 is on the first strike, following up with 10 and 18. Axe follow-up Morph slash, which is a total of 38. Counter rising slash with a combined total of 38, 15 on the first hit and 23 on the second. And Heavenward Flurry with the highest total at 45, 17 for the first hit and 28 for the second. Once again, as with switch gauge, there are only a few of these attacks that you're likely to use, as the rest are not only conditional, but time consuming as well. Unbridled slash is nonsensical to use as it has little damage compared to its startup and recovery. Elemental discharge explosion is the final hit of a few seconds long attack string, and follow-up more slashes based on a successful offslip, which leaves the multi-slashes, counter, and heavenward. Morphing has taken a back seat in this game, not just for the damage, but also utility and mobility. The primary reason you would morph from axe to sword is for damage, and sword to axe to charge your battery or offset. That isn't to say that morph attacks don't have any damage, utility, or mobility, but they are so drastically reduced in this game that it's better to just use the two modes for their intended purpose and reduce interaction with morphing to a case-by-case basis. I'll provide an example for all three. The highest damaging morph attack currently is Offset Follow-Up Morph Slash, and the highest damaging morph attack that is easily accessible is Morph Double Slash. However, due to the absolute scuffed nature of morph damage and speed in this game, there are better alternatives. For Wilds, all the utility granted to morph attacks in 5th generation have been migrated to other parts of the weapon. Morphing from sword to axe mode not only allowed for players to return to axe mode for mobility or to avoid running out of gauge, but it also generated switch gauge. It still generates switch gauge in Wilds, but it only provides 5 switch gauge for every morph, plus a guaranteed 5% for each successful axe hit. In the case of Morph Double Slash, it generates 2 and 3 on their hits respectively. Since the main goal is to move between modes not seamlessly but with an objective, the utility angle can't keep its head above the water. Unbridled and full release slash can be followed up by any elemental discharge and focus assault finisher at all times, even if the gauge is empty. I'm sorry to any dishwashers or workers out there, but I'm going to use a weapon with 10 points of white sharpness, drop it down to 9, and let the attack play so you can see, and for the less fortunate, hear how it works. If you were paying attention to the extra info displayed in the attack section, you would see that certain attacks have reduced sharpness use. This is primarily from multi-hit attacks and will round up evenly to spending 1 point of sharpness. Switch axe has always struggled with sharpness use, so this certainly helps out, but the main issue comes from the weapons themselves, as their sharpness values are usually pitiful and can be burnt through quickly. If you run out of switch gauge and you get knocked down, you are unable to morph back to axe mode after an evade recovery. This was previously available in 5th gen, however in Wilds you are unable to do so as it will end up automatically morphing you back. Switch axe explosions and Phial bursts are back to the way that they were in World. Explosions can become critical hits and Phial bursts can affect other monsters. This means that Phial bursts can pop off on other monsters than dead bodies, which can really ramp up damage. Unfortunately, Phial bursts cannot activate off of teammates or certain environmental structures like they could in World. Switch axe's combat is far more streamlined in this game. There are 2 main objectives: to reach amp state as quickly as possible from the start of the hunt as well as any time it expires, and secondly, maintaining the switch gauge. The reason you want to engage in this behavior is due to amp state ballooning DPS and damage output through Phial bursts and full release slash, while maintaining switch gauge allows you to remain in sword mode more often. However, the scenarios presented by matchups can create different flowcharts that could shorten or prolong how you achieve these goals. Despite how that sounds, there's many moving parts that can make up switch axe's combat. Movement and mobility for the weapon suffers from the game's systems and mechanics as well as the weapon's unique traits. Walking with your weapon drawn is still an effective way to get around without burning stamina, as in axe mode you have decent base movement speed that allows for controlled gap closing, while sword mode has slower base movement speed that is best utilized in tighter situations where more precise positioning is required. Evades this time around are better suited as an evasive or recovery tool, since focus mode and other additions can reduce the need to evade for positioning. To specify, axe mode evades are for chase potential, while sword mode evades are for cancels and split-second dodges. Attack movements are also viable options for traversal in this game, especially with the need to maintain stamina and how far monsters will travel away from you. There isn't particularly a best option, as they are dependent on what you need at the time. Axe forward slash, sword overhead slash, and sword rising slashes excel when you need to cover extremely small distances, such as entering the monster's space without overshooting to your required position. Axe morph slash and sword morph slash are better for medium ranged engages where you need to switch modes for their optimal use case. This can be morphing the axe to regenerate meter or land an offset, and morphing to sword to prepare for a counter or output damage. Forward overhead slash and morph overhead slash cover long distances in situations including, but not limited to, a monster's damage reaction, or a monster stepping out of range. Unfortunately, the monster will end up a distance away from you as a result of your own doing or the monster's actions. It's best to anticipate for these events through monster knowledge in order to preemptively use one of your best pursuit options. For instance, when you break weak points on a monster, the reactions can vary. Balahara has a weak point after its spitting or spraying attacks that, when popped by a focus strike, will cause Balahara to fall over a set distance away. Regardless of which finisher you used, you will have to chase the knockdown, but the intensity of the pursuit will vary. Focus Assault Axe finisher recovers faster and pushes the player closer to the monster. This allows players to catch up with medium distances such as an evade or morph slash. The sword finisher, despite dealing more damage, will push the player back and revert the player to axe mode. The space created does not allow for a simple solution, and instead requires the player to spend great effort and time attempting to catch up to Balahara. Raidao, on the other hand, falls in place, allowing for the player to remain stationary and follow up with their typical flowchart. With that said, focus mode is both a help and a hindrance. Focus mode allows for players to be able to aim their attacks and magnetize toward the monster. However, you don't always need focus mode to be active to achieve the best results. Instead, try turning focus mode on and off in certain situations in order to maximize your advantages. Focus magnetism can increase the distance of attacks toward the monster, but the distance traveled is dependent on the part closest to you. If you use an attack with magnetism toward a downed monster, like that of Heavenward Flurry, it may not receive the magnetic property if, for instance, their wing is the closest to you, even if you're aiming for the head. This will happen quite a lot when using full release slash or counter rising slash, where you may end up missing entire attacks due to a failed lunge. This is also true for being close to the monster and magnetizing stronger, like axe morph slash, as you may end up running too close to the monster and throwing yourself out of position. Know when to turn it off, know when to turn it back on. Moving from mobility, we can now discuss attacks. Despite how many attacks the weapon has, you're going to be rotating between the most vital attacks in the weapon's kit. The faster you can reach these attacks, the more often you can perform them for their intended purpose. Spiral Burst Slash and Heavenward Flurry are for meter generation, and while they are combo based, their prerequisite attacks should be considered more for their accessibility than any other reason. You shouldn't be using overhead and the side slash to reach Spiral Burst unless you absolutely have to. Offset and Counter Rising Slash are defensive options to both nullify or reduce damage while still maintaining your momentum. Full Release Slash and Focus Assault are your primary sources of damage and or CC, and should be used in instances where you can either absorb an attack, guarantee a flinch, or during a monster's topple or recovery state. Knowing when and why you're using each of these attacks is what allows for smoother hunts. The knowledge of each aforementioned attack boils down to your poking, punishing, and setting up. Poking is when you use small attacks with fast recovery during brief windows or in anticipation of a reaction, which will leave you safe to react to the monster's next action. Due to Axe Mode's high startup and active frames, Sword Mode is the better alternative to utilize pokes. The traditional poking tool is Overhead Slash due to the speed of the attack and the many different follow-up options available. This is done so that you can react quickly to an event by using your common reaction tools such as evading or counter rising slash, while also being able to capitalize on a situation like a flinch by either using rising slashes for damage, double slash for generation, and full release for maximum damage output. You could also morph to generate switch gauge or prepare for an offset. Overhead slash isn't the only poke tool available, as it all depends on your needs in the current situation, and whether you can recover fast enough. Double slash and morph slashes are just as viable an option if you have the time. A combat example would be knowing you're about to hit the monster's rage threshold and using overhead slash to add a minor hit before canceling immediately into counter rising slash. Another would be using double slash during the monster's recovery animation and waiting for the monster to use an attack before making your decision. Punishing is when you deal damage to a monster within a window of opportunity or after their attacks. The size of your punish is entirely dependent on the amount of time you have. A very common example of a wild switch axe punish is when you tuck yourself in a safe pocket beneath a monster during its attack string and you pull off a full release slash. Other punishing types include post-attack punishes, where you abuse the monster's recovery frames, and predictive punishing, where you anticipate the monster's next action and act accordingly. For the most part, your strongest punish will be full release slash. Setups are a preemptive act designed to benefit from a situation and create a scenario that you want. There are many ways to set up a situation, and most of them come from a reaction to the monster while still fulfilling the goal. For example, breaking Doshagama's forelegs and destroying the wounds on its hind legs can cause a topple. You can set up for this by abusing the legs during the engagement when it decides to roar. Once downed, you can try to reach the threshold while it is down to either break the next foreleg or open the next wound. Setting up isn't always about attacking and can be done with movement as well. If Ray Dow performs its flying wing drag attack, you can face the opposite direction and walk forward before countering the attack from behind. This places you in a better position to be able to unleash a full release slash or a heavenward flurry on whichever part that you want. Just as I did in my Sunbreak guide, I'll use two examples of good and bad gameplay. However, I'll be more descriptive with what I'm doing and how the situation unfolded. I don't believe I could say it any better than I did in my Sunbreak guide, so I'll just play an excerpt from my Sunbreak guide. Lastly, I'd like to talk about commitment and deliberation of intent. Taking any action is an act of commitment, and the larger the action, the longer the commitment. If you don't respect the monster and what it can do, you'll eventually get trampled. It's best to use your actions in their proper situations or during openings. That goes for the bread and butter combo as well as any other combo or attack that you may have. Skills in Wilds are much more generalized than previous games, but certain skills have better effect when paired with certain weapons. I won't be covering set building or telling you what's best for you, and instead I'll be covering skills and decoration combinations that benefit Switch Axe the most, starting with the armor skills. Adrenaline Rush increases attack after evading a monster's attack. This skill helps as evading attacks is one of the Switch Axe's core functions, so it's great to be rewarded for doing so. Problem is, it is exceptionally expensive to slot Adrenaline Rush in this game due to it being armor only and having 5 levels as opposed to 3. Burst increases attack and element when landing consecutive attacks with a greater bonus after landing 5 hits. Switch Axe can reach this 5 attack cap quickly with its combo strings and even faster with Phial bursts. While it may not do much for element, it certainly does improve the raw damage that can be applied. Counter-Strike increases attack after being knocked back, but it also works when successfully parrying an attack with Counter Rising Slash. This means you are rewarded for interacting with the part of your kit that you were going to anyway, and at level 3, it extends the duration so you don't always have to keep Counter Rising Slash to keep it up. Divine Blessing has a 25% chance to reduce damage depending on the level. This works especially well with Switch Axe because it helps with knockback resistant attacks like that of Counter Rising Slash, Zero Sum Discharge, and Full Release Slash. Doshagama's Might is a Doshagama and Guardian Doshagama set bonus skill, which increases attack when successfully offsetting a monster's attack. Fortunately, it doesn't need to be an offset topple in order to do so. The unfortunate part of this skill is that it is attached to Doshagama and Guardian Doshagama armor. Elemental Absorption increases elemental attack and resistance to the element taken after receiving elemental damage. This is obviously working in tandem with Counter Rising Slash, but if you take a hit you weren't ready for, then you at least have a boost. This is a better skill to have than Convert Element, as Convert Element grants extra dragon damage. The best way to describe Convert Element is just Dragon Blast. Evade Extender increases evade distance depending on the level, but let me tell you, it can help with covering up for the Switch Axe's poor movement and mobility by boosting its chase potential. Evade Window increases invulnerability window during your evades. The primary reason you would use this skill is if you aren't too comfortable with your ability to evade attacks if that's how you like playing. This can also be paired with Adrenaline Rush to better help the aggressiveness required to upkeep it, but it also serves as a utility skill that might get overshadowed by the use of Counter Rising Slash. Latent Power increases affinity and reduces stamina reduction after enough time passes, or you receive a certain amount of damage. Now, this isn't necessarily a skill that you would be looking for, as the conditions to activate them and the duration of their effect are quite difficult to achieve in a healthy manner. However, if you counter enough attacks and receive enough damage, Latent Power can activate on Switch Axe a bit more often, granted you manage to heal the damage off. Resentment increases attack while you have recoverable health, or red health. Obviously, this works best with offsets and Counter Rising Slash as you lose health for performing them. Without Divine Blessing or a perfect counter, you're likely to lose a decent amount of health, and as a result, maintain resentment for a longer duration. Focus increases the fill rate of gauges and charge attacks. At max level, it increases the amount by 15%, which is pretty hefty when paired with certain attacks. Both the Switch Gauge and Amped Gauge are affected with clear results. While yes, it's nice to have as the comfort skill, it's kind of unnecessary when the best-in-class axe attacks already generate more than 30% gauge, and the best amped attacks can be spammed quickly. That isn't to say you shouldn't get it, more power to you. Rather than just post numbers on the screen, I'll show you the actual increase with the best fill rate options with no focus, level 3 focus, and level 3 focus plus power axe for certain axe attacks. Handicraft increases the sharpness gauge by 10 for every level up to 5. A long-standing Switch Axe drawback is its poor sharpness gauges, and Handicraft fixes that issue to some degree. If you're struggling with maintaining sharpness or getting certain blue sharpness weapons to white, then Handicraft can be slotted in to provide comfort in the sharpness region. Power Prolonger increases the duration of powered up weapon states. This skill affects Power Axe and Amp State by increasing their duration from 45 seconds to 90 seconds at level 3. I was so enthralled with Focus before the game came out that I was dead set on using it over this skill, but having Power Prolonger maxed out helps with dealing DPS longer and being able to dish out more full release slashes. I'm sorry I didn't listen to you, Kage. Lord Christ Almighty, Juzzy, please don't kill me. Protective Polish prevents sharpness from decreasing for a set duration. We've been over this. Switch Axe struggles with sharpness values, and having a reason to not deal with the sharpness gauge for a limited duration is excellent, especially for comfort. However, it's very unfortunate that these are considered weapon skills because they take up slots from other skills that would be more beneficial. But if you prefer this skill, go ahead. Rapid Morph increases morph attack speed and damage. Unfortunately, in this game, its actual speed and damage increase are so middling that other skills overshadow it by a mile, but what it does make up for is the ability to swap between modes and carry out their intended purpose faster. Compare the full release slash combo with no Rapid Morph and level 3 Rapid Morph. Slightly negligible, but again, I would never tell you how to play, but instead what you're capable of. This is not an S tier skill or a necessity anymore. It is simply a comfort option. Razor Sharp has a chance to prevent sharpness loss with a percentage dependent on the level. I'm not going to repeat myself for this one. There are only a handful of switch axes that are universally good in Wilds. What makes a weapon strong in Wilds is its base raw, sharpness, decoration slots, equipment skill, and file type. High raw power file weapons with good sharpness and decent decoration slots allows for the weapon to output high damage, while the equipment skill can either improve outcomes or allow for more freedom when choosing your own decorations. The best switch axes are Lalabarina, Arshin, and the Zoshia weapons. Lalabarina is good despite its average raw and terrible equipment skill due to its high base affinity and sharpness paired with paralysis. Switch axe isn't necessarily a weapon you should be sheathing, but paralysis is so strong in this game that it's worth investing in. Arshin weapons are the DIY that allow you to create weapons with better stats and decoration slots. The only drawback is that you can't make a pure raw or element with power file weapon, which is what's missing in the Thunder and Ice department. Switch Axe severely lacks weapons with good equipment skills and file types, so Arshin weapons helps with this by providing 3 level 3 slots for their skill diversity. While you could create a blast or sleep weapon, obviously due to how strong paralysis is, you would create a paralysis Arshin weapon. Zoshia Switch Axe is the only weapon capable of rivaling a fully customized Arshin weapon due to its high base raw, decent white sharpness, power file, and an S tier equipment skill. I could go in crazy detail about it, but I'm just going to direct you toward Juzzy's video on it instead so you can get a better, more detailed breakdown. Speaking of Juzzy, every game Switch Axe has been in has had a reason why power file is better than other file types, with the exception of Sunbreak. Poison and paralysis are better suited for early to mid progression due to lower status tolerance values in monsters. Exhaust has a chance to apply its effect in older games, and a guarantee in newer games, but there's always a drawback that outweighs the desire to use it. Dragon is just poorly implemented, and elements in base games are more often than not less viable due to modifiers and base weapon values. However, I wanted to consult Lord Juzzy himself and ask for the percentage increases of power and element file, to which he revealed to me that the file bonus from these respective file types are affected by the base value of the weapon. For power file, you receive 17% of the weapon's base value and not an increase from any outside sources such as seeds or skill increases. Same for element file. Your 45% increase is not picked from your total value and is instead increased by the base value. Each weapon has an elemental cap that can be reached under certain conditions, disallowing any further elemental improvement to take place. This combination of terrible design continues this long-winded tradition of completely eradicating element file as a viable option in pre-expansion titles. Alright, I'm done. I'm tired. I'm pushing out major overtime with wonky hours for the last month or so, and I'm sorry this took forever to make because I really did try shaving down the amount of time, but I don't think I made a difference really. I hope you enjoyed this despite my disappointment in the game and weapons showing through. Considering I'm not enjoying the game, I don't really plan to make content on it in the future as I was already demotivated when working on this one, so instead, once again, I'm going to shake up what content I make just as I did after my sunbreak guide. Whatever direction my channel goes from this point forward, I appreciate your attention and I hope to see you around for my future endeavors. Until next time.